Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Titan Alumni Talks, a weekly podcast where we talk to alumni about their experiences at Cal State Fullerton and where they are today. For this week's episode, our guest is Raymond Ortiz, who received a BA in History in 2011 and an MA in History in 2015. He currently works as a Director of Project Development at RelyOn Technologies, and in this episode we talk about activities he participated in while at CSUF, along with why he believes history is an underrated major. Listen to these episodes live on Saturdays at 6 p.m. on titanradio.org, or you can binge them on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/CSUF alumni. So thank you, Raymond, so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All right. So the first thing I want to touch on is what you do currently. So you currently work at RelyOn Technologies, and right there you're a Director of Project Development. And you did work there previously for quite a few years, but you kind of moved up in that space. So what do you do now, and how does it differ from what you did before as like a project manager?
Sure. As you said, I work right now at RelyOn Technologies. I worked there when I was in school at Cal State Fullerton. I was at Cal State Fullerton all together for 9 years. I did my bachelor's there, spent a year doing classes for the credential program. I was a history major, and then I decided to switch back and go back to get my MA in history. So I worked the whole time while I was in school. I put myself through school. I think that's the great part of being at a Cal State, is I'm able to do that and afford to do that. And so at RelyOn, when I was there for that first chapter, if you will, when I was there during school, I managed a lot of their accounts, so database management, sales, paperwork, etc. So it was pretty easy for me to manage that in a certain time frame and then coordinate my schedule. Being a history major, there's a lot of different options for classes, a lot of evening things, and my employers, they're very flexible with that. They were very supportive of me being in school, so that was important. When I was a history major, how I ended up back at RelyOn on that entire journey is I actually, after my master's, was pursuing a PhD program. I applied, did the whole shebang, got into some schools, went and toured them, visited them, and decided it wasn't for me. I didn't want to go down that path. At the time, there were many reasons why, but I decided I wanted to have something different, a bit more hands-on, rather than writing about other people doing things that are hands-on. So I wanted to just start. After grad school, my focus as a history major was gender and sexuality, queer history, and women's history. So I wanted to kind of start, instead of me keep talking about what I want to do one day, I should just do it, whether it's paid or not, whether that's volunteering or something part-time on the side of something that will, pay the bills. So I was working in retail after grad school. I left RelyOn, wanted to get a change of scenery. And then I was also working retail and then working part-time at the LGBT Center of Orange County. Like, I wanted to take my research that I did for so many years and apply it to greater causes and projects. So while there, I worked as one of their community outreach coordinators, overseeing some of their programs. I was there for about a year and a half, and I also helped them in the front office. So what I learned in that time is, while I enjoyed being at the front line with their programs, I actually preferred being in the more behind the scenes with the office team. I realized with the skill sets that I learned as a history major, I was able to apply it, being able to professionally write, research, critical thinking, teach, lead, hold presentations, etc. When you take out the history part of a history major, like, what's left? It's the different tools. And I like being part of the team that kept the lights on and the doors open. So now, how could I translate that into a career? I fell into fundraising for nonprofit organizations. From working at the nonprofit that is the LGBT Center, I began a roughly 5-year career at CCS Fundraising. They're a fundraising and consulting firm for nonprofit organizations. Anytime you see, right now, Cal State Fullerton having their capital campaign that's going on, that's 100% what I did for 5 years, was manage campaigns. Nonprofit organizations would bring on a consultant to run it for them because it's just so big. You need that additional staff during that time. And that's what I did for 5 years, working first in the administration part of CCS and then translating to one of the consultants who was there at the front of it all, running the fundraising for nonprofit organizations across different sectors. I worked with like religious ones, educational ones, human services, medical, the arts, etc. So that was great experience. And along the way, what was so great was just finding and seeing different ways how I was able to apply my degree, my experience. Because a lot of people are like, well, history, like other than maybe teaching or working in a museum or writing history, what can you do with it? And like I said before, you take out the history aspect of it. Like if I take out the gender and sexuality, like all the topics I researched, what am I left with? What are the different tools? And it was funny because when I interviewed with CCS, I kind of had my entire resume, my work experience, like here are my degrees, blah, blah, blah. And the only thing that fascinated them was my time as a grad student. I founded the Cultural and Public History Association for the History Department. And it was very grassroots. It began with 5 members. We had to do a lot of hands-on fundraising ourselves. By the end of my time as a grad student, after 2.5 years, we're up to like 50 paid active members. We launched our own journal working with the history department. And that's what impressed them. They're like, how did you raise that money? How did you turn this grassroots club into something bigger? And that's why I think it was important to really flesh out my degree, my experience. And you don't really know what will catch someone's eye. So I was there for 5 years, decided I wanted to change of scenery. When you're a consultant, you definitely are on the road a lot. And I was done with that. I wanted a bit of a change. So I started looking elsewhere to see where I can land more in-house, what I can do full-time within an organization. So I ended up as a development operations manager for World of Children. They're an international nonprofit that does fundraising for humanitarians working with youth across the world. So there I was a one-man band running their entire development department. Unfortunately, I was there for less than a year, and then because of COVID and everything happening, they were one of the casualties. After 22 years, they had to shut their doors. It was just hard to sustain with everything going on. So, at that point, it's survival mode. You have to pivot. Any position that I've ever had, I always stay in contact, make sure I leave on positive terms. And with RelyOn, they needed extra help. They're in the automotive industry, which is essential. And I have to pay the bills. And when things shut down there, that's when the world was hit by everything going on. So nonprofit organizations were a lot of the first taking that hit. And so, it's okay, well, what's next? What can I do? And they were looking for that extra hands-on support. And so I immediately jumped back on, and it's been a great position right now to have on the interim, because is it fundraising? No. Is it history? No. Am I able to use my degrees, my experience thus far? 100%. It's just certain things where there's different chapters in my life where different areas of my degree or my work experience comes into play. And, it's all been a continued onward and upward, fortunately. So that's where I ended up back there. And right now, same thing, and that's what I kind of learned between nonprofits or for-profits. It's all the same. When you're trying to sell someone like the Cal State Fullerton campaign, approaching someone to make a gift, it's all sales. It's the same thing. Do you have a cause? What's your reasoning? Can you make the pitch? And I'm still the person researching, writing, doing all that front work, that admin operations, and they're all tools that I did for roughly 9 years at Cal State Fullerton in my field. So that's where I'm at now.
I see. So you brought up a lot of great points, and some of them I want to touch on. One of the main ones is that you got your history bachelor's and then a master's in history as well. And you talked a lot about how you get extra tools outside. If you strip away the whole history of it, then you just get the tools that you learned from maybe giving presentations in class or reading different books and just like learning how to analyze the situation. It gets a little bit more niche as you go up from your bachelor's to your master's to your doctorate. So are there more tools that you learn as you go up, or is it just more diving into history itself? So would it be like, so my question is, would it be like beneficial for someone trying to get into like your field or just like a general field at all to get their master's in history if it wasn't necessarily their passion to learn history?
I think with history, because of the humanities itself, it falls under that umbrella. The humanities, the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, it's filled with a lot of majors where it's fueled by passion. You know, I can say from my own experience that a lot of those positions aren't the 9 to 5, 6, 7-figure type jobs. From what I've seen in my previous job hunts, and I could very much be wrong, but people are first and foremost there. It's because they want to be part of something bigger than them. Now, I think if you're a history major and you want to continue in that path, I absolutely think getting an MA is beneficial. When you have your bachelor's in history, the bulk of your units are spent on doing sampling of every realm. So you're required to, at least when I was there, for my BA, I graduated with my bachelor's in 2011. So, part of the requirement for the department is I have to take X amount of units in US history, X amount in world history, X amount in European history, X amount in oral and public history. So it's a sampling. So you kind of graduate with a degree that's across the board. And then your master's, it's a bit more of an open slate. When I was there, you pick what you want to pick as long as it fulfills certain requirements, but they have like variations of each. So like if you're taking your theory class, well, there's a US history version, there's a European, there's a world history, there's A, B, C, D. So, but as long as you take one of those that fulfills it, you're good. And then at the time, our department set it up where your electives in your master's, you can take 400 level courses in other departments, which was great because at the time, the history department didn't offer too much in modern history. So I know what I wanted to focus on, which was gender, sexuality, queer history, women's history. So I maximized what I could in my department. And then I took basically all of my electives in the American Studies department. And that kind of supplemented it because they had much more to offer in courses than the history department did, which was fantastic. So definitely, if you are actively pursuing a career specifically in history, 100% I would say get your master's. With your PhD, I can't really speak too much on that. All I know is I had professors and advisors that told me, and even when I did those visitation weekends at those universities, the current students said, if what you want to do, you absolutely need the PhD to do it, then do it. But you'll often find that most positions out there, even teaching at the college level, you don't need it. And for the time, the energy, the effort, the money that's going to go into it, it's a lifelong commitment. Even with my master's, the program would have taken me probably another 7 to 8 years. And it just would have been too much. And at that point, I still had a lot of, I don't know. It's like, well, is this what you want to do? I don't know. Well, where do you want to live? I don't know. And for that commitment, I wasn't 100% sure enough in anything to make that commitment. So like I said, if you want to go from master's to PhD, well, you have to really ask yourself, do I absolutely need it to do what I want to do? And that's part, you have to kind of research your intended profession a bit more.
I see. So you brought up a couple more good points over there. One of them being is that I've heard from other people in social sciences when they major in it, they are required to like jump around with their courses, and it's not directly. It doesn't have to be directly related to the major. Whereas like other more specialized degree paths, it is just get all of your things. There might be a couple GEs that you could take around. But you're telling me that there are like 400 level classes where you could take from any other college. It's just really nice how they allow you that flexibility to make you a well-rounded person. So it seems like for these jobs that do not necessarily require a specific background or degree in, like maybe being a project director or a project manager, especially for a nonprofit, it seems like having a good background, a diverse background in your education would be like the most beneficial than maybe just getting a specific degree in one part. And then something else you mentioned that was really great was going for your PhD in history. If you were to do that, you mentioned it would take so many more years. And the one thing I can equivalent that is maybe going to med school and becoming a doctor. But then when becoming a doctor, you can kind of see that there are other motivations behind it, not just the passion for learning or the passion for medicine. It could be you want to save lives or you want to be respected in that field, or maybe it's the money that's the incentive. But for history, it seems like the only incentive or the only thing that is keeping you going is just being passionate about history, which it would take quite a bit of a commitment, it seems, to like just jump the gun and be like, okay, this is what I'm going to do for a decade before getting out into the workforce or maybe working alongside it.
And I think that's such a great point because, I was coming off of a generation of the history department where even advisors and professors, they're products of those paths. So when they encourage students for career paths, it was teaching, PhD route, or work in the museum. I would like to think, just having still in contact with a lot of my colleagues, former colleagues and professors there, that there were many Raymonds who kind of came back from going through all that, applying to school, taking the GRE, getting there and basically saying, no, I'm not doing this. Like, okay, we're seeing a trend here, well, why? And now there's been a lot more of a conscientious effort by the department to show alternative career paths history majors, where those three options are now three of many other ones. And so they'll bring in, like what we're doing now, they'll bring in alumni at the grad student orientation or the undergrad orientation to come share the experiences. You got people working in government. You have people who work in education. You have people who work in business or sales or retail and explain how their degree applies. So I very much applaud the effort. One of my friends, his entire history research in the grad program was on the beer industry in America. And now he works as part of management for a company that sells beer. So, is it history? No, but it's also 100% what he did. So that's the emphasis now, where I like to go back and share my career path. And I'm 100% where I had hoped to be. Is it technically like the category of history, my current job or any of my jobs? Not at all. But would I go back and change my major? No.
I see. So I want to talk a little bit about the work that you were doing or the work that you did at Cal State Fullerton. So I know you did quite a bit when you were getting your master's, such as being an editor-in-chief for the Journal of Cultural Studies, also being a grad TA, and you also mentioned creating the CSUF history department, or like the History Alumni Advisory Council. So were there any things that you did when you were in your bachelor's?
No. My bachelor's, I was the atypical kid that was kind of introverted for their own, wasn't the best. I probably should have been more involved, but I was the kid that went to class, did their thing, and came home. I didn't really get involved. Yeah, so I lived in La Habra at the time, which was about 15 minutes down the street. So I would come to school, do my thing, go home, I worked, like I said, I put myself through school for my bachelor's and my master's. And it wasn't until my last year of my undergrad where I decided to submit some of my papers to the history department's journal, the Willoughbyson. So I did that. That was cool. I became a member of the History Society because they kind of like told us to. So I'm like, okay, well, that sounds fun. And then I got involved with that last year in the Queer Straight Alliance with one of my other friends. So it wasn't the most like robust, fulfilling experience. That part, I think if I can go back and change, I would. So now, having that in mind, when I went into the grad program, I made a complete 180 and I became like the poster child for the history department and signed up for everything. I signed up for conferences, flew all over the country doing presentations at history conferences. I did the Willoughbyson as an editor, which at the time was its own 400 level class. And then they had asked me to come back to be the editor-in-chief of the Willoughbyson. So I did that and then was part of all the history clubs, did all that, got bored, and then decided to begin my own club, did that, began a history journal for that club because I didn't have enough on my plate while still working full-time. Was a TA for a professor, was taking a full load as a student, did the thesis, graduated at 4.0, and had an entire experience that I like to think made up for my undergrad in those 3 years. So now I look back at my CV and I'm like, how did I do all this in 2.5 years? It does not make sense. Like, it's just so packed. And that's what I'm so proud of. So I didn't really have that fulfillment in my undergrad, and that was all on me. And I'm glad I didn't, so that I can now reflect and appreciate and now tell other students, like, you work hard, you play hard. Like, first and foremost, you're there for school. Like, that's why you're there. Don't lose focus, but maximize it. Like, sign up for everything, be part of everything, be a full-time student. And if for 4 years you're running on 4 hours of sleep because you're doing everything, then that's fine. Because these 4 years or 4 to 5 years or 2 to 3 years for your grad program, compared to the rest of your life, you're going to have the rest of your life to work. You're going to have the rest of your life to travel, to do all these other non-school things. This is going to be a drop in the bucket compared to the rest of your life with all the years that you have left on Earth. So maximize it and make the most of it.
I see. So yeah, you can attest to this. When you do participate on stuff on campus, it just becomes a lot more fun, a lot more energizing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Cal State Fullerton has that issue where we are a commuter school, so it's so easy to get lost and to show up on campus and then just get out of campus. But if you just spend a little bit extra time, find something you like, find something that just sparks your interest. Like, there's so many different clubs whenever we do Club Rush. It could be sports that you're into, maybe joining like part of a journal or like writing for a journal, and then being a TA as well. Like, that is super underrated. Going back to an old professor of yours, because I've done it as well, and then you can just like see what they saw from like their experience. Maybe it's a year or 2 years later.
Oh, yeah.
It's so much more fun sitting in that same class that you loved with the professor that you love side by side, and just like standing there like teaching students, and it's just like a different experience completely.
And I would add to that, because there's often a lot to pick from. Start in your own department. Every department has its own student clubs, student publications, like student mixers and activities. Like, that's your dirt. That's your backyard. Like me, when I was in grad school, I still maybe popped in once a year, like twice a year at the Queer Straight Alliance, but I got so engulfed in the history department, and that, I lived and I breathed it for almost 3 years as a grad student. And I'm glad that's where I invested my time, because that was my field. These were my peers I was going to classes with. I got to be part of all the clubs, all the conferences, all the publications, be a TA for a history professor. And there was so much to offer there, and professionally speaking, that's going to become your network. These are all people who are going to work with you in the future, be letters of recommendation for you, references, etc. So there's a lot to offer on campus, but when you're trying to figure out how do I get involved, start with your own department because you're already there.
I completely agree, because then I always get emails constantly that are saying, "Oh, for engineering and computer science, we're having this type of like mixer, this type of get together, this type of," and now everything's on Zoom, so it's super easy to join.
Oh yeah.
But it's like this resume workshop or like for an internship, it's just like join together with like your faculty peers, and you can find job opportunities so easily through that, and just like really simple to get involved with that. And then yeah, sometimes like you kind of feel that you're too engulfed in your major, you kind of want to take a break from it. It's completely fine. You can branch out with
Yeah.
GPs, meet people through that, and that's where I was a TA for. It was HCOM 100, I believe, public speaking, and I was a TA for it. It was a nice break away from like my maths, my sciences, my
Totally.
computer science classes to be like, okay, and that class was on a Friday when I was a TA for it. So it was like, let go of everything, take a break, and just sit down for like 3 hours in a public speaking course that I love with a professor that I love, and just chill with like students. And it's just find something that you like and just go with it. Because if you're not open to any experiences, you'll miss out on those connections, like you mentioned. And yeah, especially if it is in your field and then you're trying to connect with those people, you have to be involved. It's not just gonna like
Completely.
it's not gonna come to you. You kind of have to like take a step out the door and say, okay, what is there that it offers? And the school does a great
Right.
job at like letting you know what there is. You just have to
Hmm.
take the step at that point.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about your interest in history. So where did this come from? Was it directly like out of high school you wanted to do history, or did you like change your major, or even contemplate changing your major at all?
In high school, I think history was the subject I hated the least. And I think it's because I very much enjoy like US history classes and my government classes. So I decided to just kind of continue with that path and let's see what happens. So I was never undeclared as an undergrad. I went in as a history major. I originally wanted to go into, I think, teaching, which is why I kind of had that few, like 1 or 2 semesters taking credential classes between my bachelor's and my master's. So I was a history major. The last 2 years of my undergrad, when I was getting in those more capstone courses where it was all about me and the topics that I wanted to research, that's when it began to be a bit more fun because I wasn't taking those like X amount in US history, X amount in world. Like even as an undergrad, your last like 2 or 3 classes are all you. So those are the only ones you have a bit more control of. And that's when I began to fall in love more with the subject matter and the field of history itself rather than the profession that I can pursue with this degree. I started liking like history just for history, if that makes sense. What I do with the degree, I don't know later on. I think that's where my passion for teaching was beginning to taper off. And I just wanted to just continue learning. And, my parents always taught me like, if you're not sure what you want to do, that's fine. Keep going to school in the meantime until you figure it out. So I still had those lingering thoughts of, well, maybe I want to continue in the credential program. So I took those classes. I'm like, you know what? I don't know what I want to do, but what I do know is I don't want to do that, at least not right now in my life. So I'm going to keep going to school until I figure it out. And that's the thing. Like when I went to the grad program, I had advisors that said, you know what? Never mind, like trying to figure out what I want to do for your thesis now. You just began the program. Like just take classes that sound cool to you, as long as they're filling requirements. But don't worry about is it all going to fit at the end when you do like your thesis or this or that. They said because when you take those courses, those ones that you just sound cool and fun to you, never mind the rest, that's where you're going to find your passion and your interest. And so I did. And that's kind of where how I got to that point. Like I said, I was never somebody that flip-flopped around. honestly, I think it could have maybe done me a bit of good to do that. Like I said, I have no regrets. I loved my field, my degree, but kind of all I've ever known. So when I hear stories of peers or even current students who are like, "Oh, I've changed my major like 2 or 3 times," there's no shame in that. As long as you're still maximizing your time and you're fulfilling requirements along the way, it's your degree. You're paying the tuition. As long as you're maximizing your time while you're there, like you're not just partying or messing around, like let's get down to business. This is why we're here. But, I'm someone who didn't. I'm very like type A OCD. I like having a syllabus for everything in my life. But sometimes that when you're so rigid, you could miss out. And I think like that's why maybe my grad experience was so jam packed, because like I said, I was making up for a lot that I missed out on during my undergrad. And maybe part of what I wished during my undergrad wasn't to have a plan for everything. So.
I see. And that's great advice that your parents gave you, and same with like your graduate advisors. Because I know a lot of people who they might be having a little, like they might be struggling in a couple of the classes, or they might just not know if like that major works for them. But as long as like you stick with your classes, or maybe you take like some GEs, or like maybe not a gap year, but maybe if you go part time for a bit just to try and figure things out, as long as you continue your education, then hopefully things will work out in the end, and it prevents you from just saying, "Hey, look, I'll continue it later," and then you kind of just drop out without having a degree and trying to find a job in that field. So I'm curious, did you ever like get hit with the stigma of maybe a or a history major or any other social science major might not make a lot of money or might not have like a good field to find jobs in?
I get that all the time still. And I mean, I just tell people, well, my resume speaks for itself. I'm doing just fine. But I've always advised current history students, because I've been invited back, when there's orientations or whatever from the history department. It goes back to, you also need to know how to sell your degree. Like I said, I fleshed out the skill sets that I learned because I was interviewing for jobs that weren't history professions. So I think that's the same with any major. And I've kind of mentored here and there, like kids who are, and I say kids, now I look back and they're all kids to me, but like someone who's an English major, I was like, well, you don't have to be like a professional, like novelist to have a successful degree. Like every business, like big corporate America, all the way down to small businesses, everyone needs good writers. So you can sell that. If you're in the performing arts, well, you know how to carry yourself in conversation, you know how to speak, you know how to public speak. Like there's different ways where anyone can take their field and apply it in different realms. But you don't want to like pigeonhole yourself and say this is all I can do. Like, well, no, like you have to practice that. You have to practice how you can sell your degree. And I was going into fields, going into positions where they're going to read history major. Well, how does that benefit us? And I had to do my homework and answer that. And, if there's always a misconception, well, what could I do with history? Well, I'm doing it every day. And it's all the same thing. Like I said, it's research, it's writing, it's editing, it's professional writing, it's knowing how to put together documents, how to do analysis with your research, etc. But it takes that practice of being able to sell it.
I see. And I like the way you mentioned with performing arts as well, because I'm sure a lot of people who are in like other performing arts college or any other performing arts college, that maybe their end goal is Broadway, but obviously that cannot happen for everyone. So
Right.
for those it doesn't happen to, what can they do with their degree? And like you said, just like having to sell it. In some of those majors, it is required to do that. I know, like obviously, if you go for like medicine or computer science, people know why you took that major and why you're important for their company or like where you want to work. But sometimes, like if you're a history major, that was a great way you put it. Why should they accept you? Like what's so important about your degree that someone else doesn't have? even if it's like a more specialized degree, maybe even in business. So I like the way you
Mhm.
put it, where you just have to find like those specific things you've done and that you've learned through your degree, and then you can just put it down on paper and show it to them, or even just show it to them like in person so they can see it.
Right. And
So,
I actually did that before when I interviewed at CCS. They said, "Oh, if you have any samplings of your work," and I'm like, "I don't have any fundraising experience. I can't show up with that." So I showed up with a copy of the Willoughbyson and then a copy of the journal that I began for the Cultural and Public History Association. I'm like, here's what I can do. I said, this journal happened because of me. This took me being like a TA for editing class, which means I was co-managing 20 students. This shows I know how to work with timelines because we had to work with a publishing house to print them. So I know how to work with timelines. I know how to manage data. I know how to research and fact check. And so that blew them away, because to walk in with a 200-page journal that I did, right there, it's a perfect petri dish of everything that I can do.
mm-hmm. And I think that would apply to all majors where it's getting a degree might not just be enough for any company. If you just get a degree, but like a lot of places might require experience in the field or maybe just like extracurriculars that you do. So it's important not just to put yourself on a specific niche saying, hey, look, I went to college for 4 years, I got my degree, and I came back home every single day. Maybe it takes more like, hey, I joined these clubs, I started this. Here's my portfolio, here's my resume. Like maybe if you're an art major, just taking the classes and just doing the work in the classes might not be enough. Maybe you
Mm-hmm.
have to like work on your own. Maybe you have to show a journal. I know for computer science, that's the case as well. You can't just do the projects assigned to you in the classes and expect that to be enough because
Right.
you're not the only one who did it. Everyone else who graduated from Cal State Fullerton did those same projects. So it might be, hey, find some stuff on YouTube, look something up on Google, maybe
Mm-hmm.
learn some languages that are not offered at your school, just so you're more well-rounded. You can say, hey, look, I got the degree, plus I did this, and that just
Right.
exponentially makes you more important to them, and it just
Mm-hmm.
makes you more well-rounded, like even in those specific fields that you have over there.
Exactly.
All right, and we're going to ask him some questions, some quick fire questions, and we want to know his answers to these. So Raymond, these are going to be like super quick. We want these
Okay.
answers, and we want to know what your thoughts on these are. Like, are
Okay.
you with the majority on this? Because I know definitely I'm in the minority, and I hate most people's answers because they're not good.
Oh, I'm an open book, so I don't know if it's gonna come back and taunt me, but let's see.
All right, so for the first one, coffee versus tea.
T.
Which was better, undergrad or graduate school?
Graduate school for sure.
Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Early bird. I woke up at 5:30 this morning, wide awake, so I was just playing my Animal Crossing. So it is what it is.
Math or language arts?
Math for sure.
So do you prefer in-person or virtual?
Ooh, that's a good one. I prefer in person. I think it's just always fun to kind of talk to people and feel someone's energy.
Are you an outdoor or indoor person?
Oh, I'm an indoor
Oh,
person.
dog or cat?
Oh, dog.
Do fruits or veggies?
As I've gotten older, veggies. I'm having fun like with cauliflower and what I can do with it to make it taste like buffalo wings. So that's fun.
Phone call or a text message?
Text message.
Waffles or pancakes?
Pancakes. I wasn't raised with waffles.
So iOS or Android?
Oh, iOS. Everything I have is Apple based.
Do you prefer online shopping or shopping in a store?
Online shopping.
So pen or a pencil?
A pen. I don't think I even own any pencils.
Last question is winter or summer?
Winter, because I look better in winter clothing.
All right. So now what I want to ask you is about your ideas on success. So what does success mean to you, and has it changed from when you were a college student?
My idea of success was having, Raymond Ortiz, PhD. It was about title, it was ego, and I was doing it more for all the wrong reasons, the title, and I wasn't enough for the right reasons, like how I shared earlier. So success back then was based on ego and about bragging rights and an idea of fame, or at least fame in this one field and notoriety. And now I look back and I'm like, I was in such a bubble. And I think that's what I try to do when I go back to the history department and speak is I'm here to pop those bubbles with all these students. So now my idea of success is, being able to afford a 1-bedroom apartment in Fullerton, which is expensive, by myself without 4 roommates. Being able to provide for myself to stand on my own 2 feet. The fact that this year, during this pandemic, I was able to pay off my car and pay off my student loans completely. And just being happy with what I do. I'm proud of the work that I do. And, I don't live to work, I work to live. And I think that's what success is now, is being happy.
A lot of people just think that like having that name on the paper, like you mentioned before, having like your name Raymond Ortiz with a PhD would be your idea of success. But now that you think back at it, what does it mean to say Raymond Ortiz PhD if there's like no happiness behind it? So like people from the outside will be like, oh wow, he's so successful, he has his PhD in history. But if you're not happy, what does it all mean? Like what's the worth of it? So another question I wanted to ask was about history. Could you give like maybe a pitch to people who are trying to get into history, or maybe they're like undecided major, or whether they want to continue history or not? Could you like vouch for your major?
Absolutely. I think what was great about being a history major is, first and foremost, it's fun. I thought it was more fun in the grad program, even though like grad school on paper, the workload was harder, but yet it was easier because I was taking classes and researching stuff that I picked that was of my interest, which made it that much more enjoyable. So I didn't really feel like work the same way my undergrad did. It was just a great opportunity to engage in a field and get a degree for it, where it's about thinking big, conversing with others, having that camaraderie, with peers, being able to create. I think it's a different art form because I'm still creating in my own way. I get to research, I get to write. History is storytelling, and I thought that was so fun. It's a small field in the sense where you're not going to get lost in the shuffle, but it's big enough where there's many opportunities and there's many other things you can do with it. There's so many tools and skill sets that you can acquire, that you can apply to different fields. I worked in the nonprofit realm, I worked in retail, I worked in fundraising, and I worked in corporate America.
So yeah, you kind of get that freedom, like once you graduate, where you could kind of work anywhere that your major would allow you to work, whereas you're not like confined as, hey, look, I majored in this, I'm stuck maybe for the rest of my life or until I get another degree or specialize in something else. So to end it off, I wanted to ask one question for you. What was your favorite memory at Cal State Fullerton?
Oh God, I probably in the graduate program when I began the Cultural and Public History Association, I thought, everything up to that point, I joined something that was already established, but to then go and create something, and then within that to create a journal that students across the entire university can apply to. And the work that the club did it was like snowballing to the point where we were featured in USA Today for some of the work that we were doing. And I thought that was so rad because that's, that's making memories right there. And the camaraderie that came out of that, like a lot of my professors became friends, my friends became family, where a lot of my peers, I was in their weddings, I was part of their family somehow, and vice versa. And I thought it was so amazing and such a joy. But it's those instances where, I'm rolling up my sleeves and I get to leave behind something that I built from scratch. And I thought it was so rad because not everyone can say that. Like, you can easily join a club and become the president of it and do this, but there's the things that are already established. And I think that's where like the whole ego thing worked to my favor, because I got bored easily and I wanted to like leave my own mark and kind of, push people along the way through and like, let me get to the front of the line. And it was fun. It was just like being able to create in a way and create a space that then outlived me in that way, because now I look back and I'll go back and visit, and the journal is now on its sixth publication. And it was so cool to look at this most recent one and open it and to see like all the students involved with it, the professors. And I had a big smile on my face because I didn't recognize one name on there. And that tells me that it has completely outlived me, which is what I wanted. It continued without me. It was able to, live without me being there to pull strings and to lead and do what I needed to do. And that's not something that most people can say that they have. Like, a lot of people have a great experience, but they're going into clubs or A, B, or C that's already established. But to be able to leave your mark and to create a space for others to partake, or to push others to do the same thing, I think is pretty rad.
Mm-hmm. And so I did create this podcast, and I do kind of hope that after I graduate, it would be something similar to how your journal was, where my name would not be attached to this at all, and it would just like fall in the hands of another student who kind of just lives on the legacy of this. So it would just be the name of the podcast, and that is it. And yeah, just creating something bigger than you, where it just like leaves a legacy and just like leaves a lasting impression. So who knows how long this will last? And I'm not sure yet, since I'm still like hosting it. But my end goal, hopefully, for this is that maybe I'll one day be like a guest on the podcast, like 10 years from now, with another student in my like seat giving that interview. So yeah, I could kind of see, like, I could clearly see where you're coming from, where starting something new is a lot like, and anyone can join something, but starting that's sort of like starting a business or starting like a company, where it's just like something new. It's a different take on
I
things.
agree. And I think like what you created the very same thing. And someone who's now been on the outside for a while, whether you're going to continue in academia, like a PhD program, or you're going to just jump into the professional realm, platforms like this, passion projects like this are what separate you from the rest. It's what got me jobs. It's what got me into PhD programs. I think of the National History Society, Phi Alpha Theta. Cal State Fullerton's history department has a chapter. Most universities have a chapter. So when you're applying to PhD programs, everyone's part of Phi Alpha Theta. But there's only one student that stands out who did all the same stuff, and then went and created their own thing. And those are the things that separate yourself from the rest. So you're able to kill two birds with one stone, where you're able to have a fulfilling experience. But like yourself with your podcast, you're also setting yourself up for the future, because you can say you did this. You can explain your process from beginning to end. And that's going to become very appealing, whether you're continuing your education in academia or you're going to continue in the professional realm. You're setting yourself up separately from the other CVs or the other resumes that are in the room.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like ties back into like what we said in the beginning, where find something you like doing on campus, and it doesn't necessarily have to be related to your major if you feel like you're already too engrossed in it. So for me, computer science, I'm kind of like just doing that constantly at school with all my classes being related to it. And then I come home and I work on those projects, or I work on my own projects related to computer science. And this is a completely different angle. If most people wouldn't expect me to be a computer science major, maybe a comms major, or another social science major taking on this job, maybe even CTVA. But just doing something that it doesn't necessarily have to be in your major to get involved on the campus and get involved with other people and meeting new people. It could be something completely random, but as long as you enjoy what it is, and that is it. That's it. As long as you enjoy what it is and you're doing it, then that's all there is to it. It doesn't have to be related to your major. It doesn't have to be making you money. It could just be a volunteer experience. It doesn't have to take up all of your time. It could just be a few hours a week. And just by doing it, you do set yourself apart from all the other people who are applying for things. And you just better yourself for the future. And you're kind of not just stuck into the go to class, go home for 4 years. And what did you get out of it? Just a degree.
Exactly.
All right. So just to end it off real quick, are there any like last tidbits of advice, like maybe your top 3 that you would give to like any Cal State Fullerton student?
The most important thing is to don't forget why you're there. For undergrads, I know that finishing 15 initiative, that wasn't there when I was around. So now I get it, I see it. My whole thing is Do I agree with maybe how it's verbalized? Not 100%, but basically set yourself up so that you could finish in 15. Don't forget why you're there. At the end of the day, even all the extracurricular stuff that I've been raving about, I was there for a degree. Going to conferences, getting, an award, being part of a journal, TAing, that's not going to get me my bachelor's. That's not going to get me my master's. I'm there to work. I'm there to get a degree. I was full-time. I worked part-time. Even though part-time, I was able to pay for my undergrad and my master's myself. If I needed to get student loans or grants, I did. So I took about 5 years for my undergrad. I have no problem with that. I wasn't trying to rush in 4 years because I was also putting myself through school. But those 5 years, I wasn't messing around. I was maximizing my time the best that I could, and I got things done. So I would say stay focused on that. And to grad students, when you're taking your capstones in any department, most of the time, those are independent studies. Less than 8% of people in graduate programs actually finish. And my theory from seeing colleagues and peers, it's that point when you're at your capstone, that's the make or break. And I believe this also can apply for undergrads as well, where when you're taking independent studies, like whether it's 3 or 6 units, if you're working on a thesis or a project or something, or even your exams, you're in theory supposed to, like, those 6 units, 3 units, that's 3 to 6 hours a week. It's still considered coursework. I've seen so many people who, because they're no longer in a physical classroom, they'll take an extra shift at work, or they'll go mess around, or they'll do other stuff. And it's like, no, that's still school time. So if you need to schedule like Tuesday, Thursdays at 4 p.m., you're at home at your desk or at your coffee table doing homework, working on your project, do it. And I've seen the majority of people that I met in my my grad program, my cohort, the ones who just didn't finish, they finished all their coursework except for the thesis, except for the exam, and it's because I don't know what it is, where they have these independent units that they're supposed to be using that's purposely for whatever it is. And they're going and getting more shifts at work, or they're planning a little trip, or they're signing up to be a TA for someone or other projects. It's like, that's not what it's for. Just because you're not in a classroom doesn't mean you have freedom. That doesn't mean you go take an extra shift at work. That means you do what you would have done in a classroom at home at your desk. So I think the same thing, like, stay focused. At the end of the day, all the extracurriculars, this and that, that's not why you're there. You're there to get your degree. You need to work. You need to get done however long it takes you. As long as you're maximizing your time, then it takes as long as it takes you. But if you're just messing around or dragging your feet, then why are you there?
Mm-hmm. And I forgot what the exact math is, but it says like a 3-unit course should take like a certain amount of hours per week that you should dedicate to it outside of your class time. So if the independent study is 3 hours or 3 units, you do have to like spend that same amount of time that you would for any other course. And it's right there in the name. And that's the reason they kind of like say it's independent study. And they don't just say, hey, look, you have to do it while taking other classes. They block it off for you and they make it as easy as possible for you to realize. Mm-hmm. So yeah, just like understand why you're there. I feel like that is great advice for most students.
Yeah, and there's trade-offs for everything. Like, I think there's obviously exceptions when you have people who are coming back to grad school after working. So they have spouses, they have children of their own, so their priorities are different. Like, hey, to each their own. I'm just sharing like the other Raymonds out there. I rolled from my bachelor's to my master's, so I didn't work in between. So kind of like coming out of grad school, I'm in my like late 20s, and I'm a bit of a late bloomer because now I have people who began working at 22, like post-college, and are much more ahead of me. But looking back, like, they're trying to go back to grad school now, and it's hard. And I have no regrets about that. Like, I'm so glad I got those degrees back to back done. Like, yeah, it maybe caused a bit of a pause in my professional career growing, but now I'm done. Like, I forever had those degrees done. I'm not going to go back, at least not anytime soon. I don't really have a need to. And I don't have children of my own, and I'm working full time. And just the thought of trying to go back to school now, seems insane. It seems so much, and I'm so glad that I was able to do what I need to do in the time that worked for me, and just go from one to the next without really a break, and just got it done out of the way. And now I can focus on the rest of my life.
I see. That makes so much sense. And it relates back to what you said before, where you're only in school for so much time, and then you have all your life to work. So you got those degrees done, and it didn't really hinder you from working. You were still able to get the jobs afterward.
Exactly.
All right. So now to end it off, are you on a Titan Pro network?
I am. I do receive the updates, and I get some correspondence there, so I do. There's so many resources there for undergrad and graduate students, and something that we're working on is trying to promote that and to work on the messaging a bit. So a misconception about the Alumni Association is that everything that it has to do or what it has to offer, those resources are for alumni. It's not the case at all. There's so many resources and programs that are specifically designed for current students that are undergrad and grad students. It's called Alumni Association because those programs are backed and supported by alumni members. But everything that the Alumni Association produces is for current students, not, alumni creating programs for alumni. It's alumni funding, donating, supporting, volunteering for programs and scholarships and initiatives for current students. And I think a lot of times when students hear about the Alumni Association for the first time, it's during Grad Fest. And I was one of those too. So there's a lot of scholarships, there's resources, there's many tools that are 100% for current students. And so I would encourage you to do some homework and to reach out and take advantage of the tools that are there.
So so for the Titan Pro Network spiel, so Raymond, you are on it, and a ton of other alumni are on it. I believe over 1,000 already. So basically what it is, it's sort of like a LinkedIn for Cal State Fullerton only. So this is a way for you to connect with alumni, students, faculty, and staff, and for anyone who needs general advice. So if you're sitting there and maybe you're a history major and you don't know what to do after you graduate, Raymond is on there, and a ton of other history grads are on there, where you can message them, ask for advice. Maybe if you need your resume reviewed, and the alumni are on this for this purpose to help you out. That's their main benefit from it. So don't feel shy, don't feel afraid of getting on there, asking them for help. So yeah, if you're basically on LinkedIn, you can use your LinkedIn to sign in for Titan Pro Network, and it's really simple and intuitive to use. You can filter by industry or filter by major, maybe when they got their degrees. So it's a really easy way to get your connections and just find people on through the Cal State Fullerton network. So that would be it for the podcast. Thank you so much, Raymond, for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. Cal State Fullerton has always been my home away from home. I literally spent a third of my life there between, my undergrad and my graduate experience, and I'll always be part of it in one way or another. So thanks for having me.
All right, no problem.